The echo of the Empress's command shattered the absolute silence of the Grand Court. "Kneel, human." 1,000 eyes fixed on the solitary figure in standard-issue gray armor. Captain Elias Croft didn't flinch. Instead, he adjusted his stance, looked directly into her piercing gaze, and delivered his stunning answer. The grand citadel of the Aurelian Empire was a monument to absolute power, carved from the living obsidian of Aegis Prime. Its vaulted ceiling stretched so high that it generated its own weather systems, a perpetual layer of artificial mist that drifted above the ornate chandeliers. For 10,000 years, the Empire had expanded across the Orion Cygnus arm, consuming every fledgling civilization that dared reach for the stars. Those who resisted were rendered down to ash. Those who submitted were granted the honor of serving as auxiliary forces, indentured laborers, or court amusements. Humanity had chosen submission. It was a bitter pill swallowed by the United Earth Directorate, spearheaded by diplomat Arthur Pendleton, who had signed the treaty just 5 years prior. The ink on the Solar Aurelia Accords was barely dry, but the terms were absolute. In exchange for the preservation of Earth and her colonies, humanity would provide tithes of resources, technology, and their most prized export: soldiers. Captain Elias Croft stood at the base of the Platinum Throne, a solitary speck of olive drab and gray amidst a sea of iridescent alien armor and flowing aristocratic silks. He was a veteran of the Jovian insurrections, a man who had seen the worst of what the Void had to offer. Now, he bore the dubious honor of being the first human appointed to the Empress's royal vanguard. It was a political maneuver orchestrated by the imperial court to visibly demonstrate their newest, most primitive acquisition. Croft was not there to guard. He was there to be displayed. To his left and right stood the Praetorians, the Empress's true protectors. They were towering figures, easily 7 feet tall, clad in biometric armor that pulsed with a faint violet luminescence. Their faces were angular, striking, and entirely devoid of human empathy. Commander Titus, the leader of the vanguard, cast a sideways glance at Croft. The look was one of thinly veiled disgust, a predator evaluating a particularly unappetizing prey. "Keep your eyes forward, primate," Titus murmured, his voice a low, vibrating hum that bypassed the acoustic dampeners of Croft's helmet. "When the Empress arrives, you will match my stance. You will not speak. You will barely breathe. If you dishonor this formation, I will personally throw you into the atmospheric incinerators." Croft did not turn his head. He simply adjusted the grip on his standard-issue kinetic rifle, resting the heavy stock against his hip. "Understood, Commander," he replied, his tone perfectly flat. Inside, his heart maintained a steady, disciplined rhythm. Panic was a luxury he had discarded long ago on the ice fields of Europa. The heavy gilded doors at the far end of the hall groaned open, announcing the arrival of Empress Aurelia. The entire court, a sprawling assembly of planetary governors, military lords, and alien aristocrats, fell into a synchronized bow. It was a mesmerizing display of obedience. Thousands of beings, representing dozens of conquered worlds, folded themselves in half to honor their sovereign. Empress Aurelia was a terrifying vision of regal authority. She moved with a fluid, predatory grace, her long ceremonial robes trailing behind her like a river of liquid starlight. Her features were sharp, beautiful in a cold, geometric way, and her eyes were pools of solid, unblinking silver. She did not walk. She seemed to glide, ascending the obsidian steps to her throne with the absolute certainty of a deity. As she took her seat, the court remained bowed, waiting for her silent permission to rise. Commander Titus and the rest of the Praetorians dropped to one knee in perfect unison, their armored joints clicking in a synchronized mechanical chorus. Croft remained standing. It was not an act of spontaneous defiance. It was a calculated adherence to his orders. Director Arthur Pendleton had been explicit during Croft's briefing. "You are representing Earth, Elias. We agreed to serve. We agreed to fight. But the treaty explicitly states that our military personnel retain their own martial traditions while on duty. Human guards stand at attention. They do not kneel. If you kneel, you set a precedent that we are slaves, not soldiers. Hold the line. In the vast, cavernous hall, Croft's upright posture was a glaring anomaly. He stood at rigid attention, boots perfectly aligned, chin tucked, eyes locked on a point just above the Empress's head. The silence in the room stretched, pulling taut like a wire about to snap. Empress Aurelia's silver eyes drifted down from the ceiling, sweeping over the kneeling masses before snapping directly onto Croft. The temperature in the room seemed to plummet. The atmospheric scrubbers hummed loudly in the deafening quiet. She leaned forward, resting her chin on a delicate, clawed hand. "Fascinating," she whispered. Her voice was softly modulated, yet it carried across the massive chamber, amplified by the hall's acoustics. "Commander Titus." "Majesty," Titus responded, his head still bowed respectfully toward the polished floor. "It appears your newest subordinate is experiencing a malfunction in his auditory receptors," Aurelia said, her tone dripping with icy amusement. "Or perhaps the bipedal gravity of Aegis Prime is too complex for his primitive skeletal structure to manage a simple genuflection." A ripple of nervous, sycophantic laughter murmured through the aristocratic ranks. Planetary lords exchanged knowing, condescending glances. The human was about to be made an example of. It was the favorite blood sport of the imperial court. "Forgive the creature, Empress," Titus said, rising slightly but maintaining his submissive posture. "The human mind is notoriously slow to process basic protocols. I will correct the error immediately." Titus turned toward Croft, his towering frame casting a long, dark shadow over the human captain. The Praetorian's hand dropped to the hilt of his plasma blade. "Human," Titus hissed, the violet lights on his armor flaring with sudden intensity. "You are in the presence of the sovereign of the stars. Drop to your knees, or I will sever your legs and force you to kneel on the stumps." Croft's expression beneath his visor remained impassive. His grip on his rifle didn't waver. He knew that thousands of eyes were watching him, broadcasting this moment to 100 different worlds. Earth was watching. "I am standing at attention, Commander," Croft replied. His voice, amplified by his helmet's external speakers, rang out clear and steady across the hall. "As per the martial regulations of the United Earth Directorate." The court gasped. An audible shockwave of disbelief rolled through the dignitaries. An auxiliary soldier had just talked back in the presence of the Empress. Empress Aurelia raised a single slender finger. Titus froze, his blade half drawn. "A regulation?" she mused, her voice suddenly devoid of amusement. She stood up, her robes cascading around her as she descended the steps of the dais, approaching the solitary human guard. "You invoke a regulation of a dirtball planet in my court. You are alive because I allow it, human. You breathe the synthesized air of this room because I have not yet decided to vent it into the vacuum of space." She stopped a mere 2 feet away from Croft. Despite her imposing height, forcing Croft to look slightly upward, he held his ground. "I will give you one opportunity to correct your ignorance," Aurelia commanded, her voice dropping to a lethal, vibrating whisper that echoed off the obsidian walls. "Kneel, human." The air in the Grand Citadel felt as heavy as deep water. The silence was absolute, save for the faint hum of energy weapons charging in the hands of the Imperial vanguard. 10 Praetorian guards had already shifted their stances, their plasma rifles humming to life, forming a lethal perimeter around the solitary human. Croft could feel the heat radiating from Titus's half-drawn blade to his left. He knew that one wrong word, one slight twitch of his finger, would result in him being vaporized before his nerve endings could register the pain. He stared into the Empress's silver, glowing eyes. He saw centuries of unchallenged authority, a deep-seated belief that the entire universe existed merely to serve her whims. She was expecting fear. She was expecting the human to shatter under the weight of her presence, to collapse to the floor, weeping for mercy. Instead, Croft adjusted his stance, widening his boots by a fraction of an inch to anchor himself perfectly to the polished floor. He brought his rifle up, snapping it into a sharp, ceremonial present arms position. The metallic clack of his weapon rang out like a gunshot in the silent room. "With all due respect, Your Imperial Majesty," Croft's voice boomed through his external speakers, steady, calm, and utterly devoid of fear. "My answer is no." A collective gasp ripped through the ranks of the nobility. Several aristocratic dignitaries actually stumbled backward in sheer shock. Lord Chancellor Reginald Pierce, humanity's chief liaison, buried his face in his hands over in the diplomatic gallery, convinced he was about to witness the start of Earth's orbital bombardment. Commander Titus roared in fury, fully drawing his plasma blade. The brilliant purple energy ignited, illuminating Croft's gray armor. "Die, you insolent vermin! Halt!" Aurelia's voice cracked like a whip. Titus froze again, his blade mere inches from Croft's neck. The heat from the weapon began to singe the outer ablative coating of Croft's pauldron. But the human didn't even blink. Aurelia stared at Croft, genuine confusion mingling with her supreme anger. No one had ever said no, not in 10,000 years. Whole armadas had burned for lesser insults. "You dare?" she whispered, leaning closer, her face inches from his visor. "You dare deny my command? You are a speck of dust in my empire. I can order the immediate atmospheric incineration of your homeworld with a single word. Explain yourself, human, before I have you skinned alive and broadcast to your directorate." Croft lowered his rifle back to the resting position, his movements slow, deliberate, and perfectly controlled. "If it pleases the Empress, I will explain," Croft said. He locked his gaze with hers, refusing to break eye contact. "Humanity signed the Sol Aurelia Accords to serve as your sword and your shield. We agreed to bleed for your empire. We agreed to die for your empire, but we did not agree to be broken by it." He took a slow, deep breath. "On Earth, our history is written in the blood of tyrants and the ashes of empires that demanded subservience. Thousands of years ago, a human leader named Arthur, much like the man who signed our treaty with you, said that a man on his knees has surrendered his ability to fight. He has surrendered his perimeter. He has surrendered his life." Croft gestured slightly to the towering Praetorians kneeling around the room. "Look at your vanguard, Majesty," Croft continued, his voice echoing with dangerous clarity. "They are on their knees. Their center of gravity is compromised. Their weapons are lowered. If an assassin were to breach this hall right now, it would take Commander Titus exactly 1.2 seconds to stand, draw his weapon, and acquire a target. In my world, 1.2 seconds is a lifetime. In 1.2 seconds, you would be dead." The Empress stiffened. Her silver eyes darted to Titus, who was still frozen in his awkward, half-crouched position. His blade was held uselessly to the side while trying to maintain his reverence. "A shield does not fold, Your Majesty," Croft said, his tone resolute. "A wall does not bow. You ordered my people to provide you with the ultimate defense. You assigned me to be your guard, but a soldier on his knees is not a guard. He is a victim waiting for the executioner's axe. We do not kneel because humanity refuses to be victims ever again. I will stand at your side. I will take a plasma bolt to the chest for you. I will fight until my armor is slag and my blood runs dry, but I will not kneel." He finished his speech and snapped back into absolute, statuesque stillness. The court was paralyzed. The logic was blunt, brutal, and flawlessly martial. The alien lords muttered amongst themselves, scandalized yet fascinated. No vassal species had ever framed their defiance as a tactical advantage for the Empire. Titus was shaking with rage. "Majesty, he speaks treason masked as strategy. Allow me to execute him." Empress Aurelia remained perfectly still. She looked at Croft's eyes through his polarized visor. She saw no deception, no grandstanding arrogance, only the cold, hard pragmatism of a species that had clawed its way back from the brink of extinction time and time again. She looked at his posture, the perfect balance of his weight, the immediate readiness of his weapon. Then, slowly, a strange expression crossed her face. The corners of her mouth twitched upward. It was a terrifying, beautiful smile. 1.2 seconds, Commander Titus?" she asked softly without breaking eye contact with Croft. Titus hesitated, his face flushing dark violet. "I can strike faster than that, Majesty." "Can you?" Aurelia murmured. She finally stepped back from Croft, ascending the first step of her dais. She turned to address the court, her voice ringing out with absolute authority. "The human speaks a harsh truth," she declared. "For too long, this court has favored the aesthetics of submission over the brutal reality of survival. We have grown complacent in our dominance." She turned back to her vanguard. "Commander Titus, sheath your blade and get off your knees, all of you." The Praetorians exchanged bewildered glances, but the command was absolute. One by one, the towering alien guards rose to their feet, their armor clanking in the vast hall. Aurelia looked back at Croft, her silver eyes glowing with newfound respect. "You have a dangerous tongue, Captain Elias Croft of Earth, but you have a warrior's mind. You will retain your position. And from this day forward, the vanguard of the Aurelian Empire will never again kneel in my presence. You will stand ready, because a shield does not fold." She ascended the rest of the steps and took her throne. Croft did not smile. He did not celebrate. He simply gripped his rifle, staring straight ahead, standing tall as the first human to change the laws of the universe just by refusing to bow. The reverberations of Captain Elias Croft's defiance did not merely echo through the Grand Citadel. They fractured the fundamental bedrock of imperial politics. In the span of a single afternoon, the human race went from a conquered afterthought to a dangerous curiosity. And in the Aurelian Empire, curiosity was often a precursor to annihilation. Life within the royal vanguard shifted drastically for Croft. Before the incident in the throne room, he was treated as a mascot, a primitive beast allowed to stand among gods. Now he was a pathogen. The Praetorians, led by the perpetually enraged Commander Titus, made it their personal mission to break the human who had humiliated them. This unspoken war was waged in the subterranean training arenas of the Citadel. The sparring rings were massive, constructed from kinetic-absorbing polymers designed to withstand the brutal impacts of alien biometrics. Here, Titus arranged accidental mismatches. Croft was subjected to live-fire evasion drills with safety limiters deactivated. He was paired against Kalan Elite's reptilian warriors whose muscle density was 3 times that of a human. But Croft had survived the Jovian insurrections. He knew how to fight in zero gravity, in toxic atmospheres, and against overwhelming odds. He did not fight to win, he fought to survive. He utilized Earth's oldest martial philosophies: leverage, momentum, and extreme pragmatism. When a Kalan elite lunged, Croft did not block the strike. He redirected the alien's massive kinetic energy into the arena wall, shattering the creature's collarbone. When Titus attempted to crush him in close-quarters combat, Croft targeted the delicate respiratory valves on the commander's armor, forcing Titus to back off or suffocate. Croft's survival only deepened the resentment. The political fallout was equally treacherous. In the opulent, shadow-drenched corridors of the diplomatic sector, Lord Chancellor Reginald Pierce was frantic. Pierce was a career politician, a man who believed survival was achieved through appeasement. Croft's actions terrified him. "You are going to get our entire species glassed from orbit, Elias," Pierce hissed, pacing furiously in the confines of Croft's austere, gray-walled quarters. "You think you want a victory? You humiliated the most lethal military force in the galaxy. High Minister Olarian has already petitioned the Senate to have your commission revoked and your home city on Earth bombarded as a punitive measure." Croft sat calmly on his bunk, meticulously field-stripping his kinetic rifle. He cleaned the firing mechanism with a microfiber cloth, his hands steady. "If the Empress wanted us dead, Reginald, she wouldn't have ordered her guards to stand. She respects strength. If we act like prey, they will hunt us. If we stand our ground, they will hesitate." "This isn't a battlefield, Captain," Pierce snapped, his face pale with stress. "This is a court of thousands of species. Olarian represents the old guard. He believes that by showing you mercy, Empress Aurelia has displayed a fatal weakness. Do you know what happens to Aurelian rulers who show weakness? They get replaced," Croft replied softly, slamming the bolt assembly back into his rifle. Exactly, Pierce said, leaning against the cold bulkhead. And if Aurelia falls, the treaty falls with her. The next ruler will burn Earth just to prove a point. You need to keep your head down. Do not provoke Titus. Do not draw attention to yourself. But the machinery of treason was already in motion. Deep in the private sanctums of the High Ministry, Lord Olarian was indeed orchestrating a silent coup. The Aurelian Empire had stood for 10 millennia because it ruthlessly purged anomalies. Aurelia's sudden fascination with human tactical doctrine was unacceptable. To Olarian, the sight of the Praetorians standing instead of kneeling was a desecration of the natural order. Olarian had quietly summoned Commander Titus to his chambers. The towering Praetorian was still nursing a bruised ego and a damaged respiratory valve from his last sparring session with Croft. The Empress's mind has been poisoned by the primate, Olarian murmured, pouring a cup of distilled stellar wine for the guard. She values his crude, primitive instincts over your engineered perfection. It is a tragedy, Commander. It is a temporary madness, Titus growled, his violet armor pulsing erratically with his suppressed rage. I will find a reason to execute the human. A breach of protocol, a false step. I will tear him apart in front of her. No, Olarian said softly, his ancient multifaceted eyes gleaming with malice. The human is merely a symptom. The Empress's leniency is the disease. For the good of the Empire, the throne must be cleansed, and we will use the human's own species to do it. Olarian revealed a long, sleek, metallic case on his desk. He opened it, revealing 6 matte black kinetic pulse rifles. They were not Imperial plasma weapons. They were UED standard-issue Earth weapons smuggled from the black markets of the Outer Rim. During the Festival of the Ascendant Nova tomorrow, the Citadel's internal energy shields will be calibrated for plasma and laser dispersal as per standard protocol, Olarian explained, his voice a silken hiss. They are not designed to stop hypervelocity depleted uranium rounds. You will ensure your Praetorians are stationed at the perimeter. My operatives will handle the rest. When the Empress falls to human weaponry, the Directorate will be blamed. Earth will burn, and I will assume the regency to restore order. Titus stared at the archaic, brutal human weapons. He hated the betrayal of his sovereign, but his hatred for the human who had broken his pride was greater. He slowly nodded. The trap was set, and Captain Croft was walking directly into it, armed with nothing but his instincts. The Festival of the Ascendant Nova was a spectacle of staggering proportions. The grand citadel ceiling was retracted, revealing the binary stars of Aegis Prime suspended in a nebula of brilliant violet and gold. Thousands of dignitaries filled the central plaza, draped in luminescent fabrics and bioluminescent jewels. Empress Aurelia sat upon a floating dais in the center of the plaza, elevated slightly above the adoring masses. She looked magnificent, clad in armor crafted from spun diamond and star silk. Directly below her stood her vanguard. As per her new decree, they were not kneeling. They stood at rigid attention. Commander Titus and his Praetorians formed a wide circle around the dais. Captain Elias Croft stood slightly closer to the Empress's right flank, his standard-issue gray armor standing out like a jagged rock in a stream of sparkling water. Croft was profoundly uneasy. The hairs on the back of his neck were standing on end, a primal evolutionary warning system that had kept humans alive for millions of years. His HUD was scrolling through the Citadel security feed. Something was wrong. The energy shields projecting over the royal dais were shimmering with a faint blue frequency. Croft knew Imperial technology. Blue meant thermal and plasma deflection, the standard setting to stop assassins wielding energy blades. But Croft's human paranoia, honed in the gritty ballistic warfare of Earth, noticed the flaw immediately. The kinetic dampeners, the invisible fields meant to slow down physical solid objects, were deactivated. Why would the Citadel security chief turn off the kinetic shields? No advanced species used projectile weapons anymore. They considered throwing solid matter at an enemy to be barbaric and messy. Only species like humans still relied on the brutal physics of mass times acceleration. Croft's eyes snapped to the VIP balcony overlooking the plaza. High Minister Alarion was standing there, staring intensely at the Empress. He was waiting for something. Then Croft saw them. 3 figures cloaked in standard diplomatic robes were moving against the flow of the crowd. Pushing through the aristocrats, they reached the edge of the vanguard's perimeter. From beneath their robes, they drew matte black rifles. Croft recognized the silhouette instantly. UED MKIV kinetic pulse rifles. Earth weapons. Contact front. Croft roared, his voice amplifying over the crowd's gentle murmur. The assassins raised their weapons, aiming directly at the Empress. Titus and the Praetorians reacted. But just as Croft had warned in the throne room days ago, their response time was hindered by their arrogance. They were trained to fight honorable duels, to deflect slow-moving plasma blasts with their energy shields, and to intimidate foes with their sheer size. Titus reached for his plasma blade, his biometric armor beginning its 1.2-second activation cycle to power up his weapon. In a firefight involving hypervelocity depleted uranium rounds, 1.2 seconds was an eternity. Croft moved in a blur of gray armor. He abandoned his post, sprinting up the steps of the dais. The first assassin pulled the trigger. The rhythmic boom of human kinetic weaponry shattered the elegant silence. The rounds punched straight through the blue energy shield as if it were tissue paper. Croft hit the Empress at a full sprint, driving his shoulder into her diamond armor. The impact sent the Sovereign of the Stars crashing to the floor of the dais, just as a volley of heavy uranium rounds shredded the air where her head had been a millisecond prior. The royal throne behind them exploded into a shower of platinum shrapnel. "Get down and stay down," Croft bellowed at the Empress, pressing his armored body over hers, acting as a human meat shield. The crowd erupted into absolute pandemonium. Aristocrats trampled each other to escape. The Praetorians finally ignited their blades, but the assassins were already laying down suppressing fire. 2 Praetorians fell, their unshielded joints shattered by the kinetic impacts. Croft rolled off the Empress, bringing his own rifle to bear. He relied on armor-piercing rounds and the brutal, terrifying accuracy of a human soldier defending his perimeter. He acquired the first target. Breathe in, exhale, squeeze. The first assassin's head snapped back as a 3-round burst punched through his skull. The second assassin pivoted, aiming at Croft. The UED rifle barked, and Croft felt a sledgehammer blow to his left shoulder. The depleted uranium round buried itself deep into his ablative armor, fracturing his collarbone. Pain flared, hot and blinding, but adrenaline washed it away. Croft ignored the wound, holding his weapon steady with one arm, and fired. The second assassin collapsed, his chest rendered into a bloody ruin. The third assassin panicked, dropping his weapon and turning to flee. Before Croft could fire, Commander Titus lunged forward, grabbing the fleeing killer by the throat and lifting him off the ground. With a sickening crunch, Titus snapped the assassin's neck. Silence descended over the immediate area, broken only by the screams of fleeing nobility and the heavy breathing of Captain Croft. Blood was pooling inside his suit, leaking from the massive dent in his shoulder plate. Titus stood over the dead assassins, staring at the UED rifles on the ground. He looked up at High Minister Olarian on the balcony. The minister's face was a mask of absolute horror. The plan had failed. The Empress was alive. Empress Aurelia slowly sat up. She looked at the ruined throne, then at the dead assassins, and finally at the human who was currently bleeding on her polished floor. Croft pushed himself up onto his knees, his rifle still trained on the crowd, scanning for secondary threats. Ignoring his own injuries, he scanned the perimeter with cold, predatory calculation. Aurelia stood up. She looked at Commander Titus, then at the human weapons on the floor. "Earth weapons," Titus said loudly, trying to salvage the conspiracy. "Majesty, this was a human plot. The Directorate tried to assassinate you." Croft scoffed, a wet, bloody sound over his external speakers. He didn't lower his weapon. "If Earth wanted her dead, Commander, I wouldn't have just tackled her out of the way. Look at their hands. Those aren't human operatives. They're mercenaries. Someone bought our guns on the black market to frame us. Someone who knew the kinetic shields were down." Aurelia's silver eyes narrowed. She connected the dots instantly. The deactivated shields, the earth weapons, the High Minister's sudden push to punish humanity. She walked over to Croft. The human captain was still on one knee, struggling to stand due to the weight of his armor and the shattered bone in his shoulder. Aurelia extended a delicate, clawed hand toward him. "Captain Croft," the Empress said, her voice echoing loudly in the quiet plaza. "You told me a few days ago that you would never kneel in my presence, that a shield does not fold." Croft looked at her hand, his breathing shallow. "I appear to be on my knees right now, Majesty. Apologies. Gravity and kinetic trauma are a difficult combination to argue with." Aurelia smiled, a genuine expression of profound respect. "Then, take my hand, Elias Croft, and rise. Because from this day forward, humanity is no longer a vassal of the Aurelian Empire." Croft hesitated, then grasped her hand. With surprising strength, the Empress pulled the wounded human to his feet. "You are no longer my subjects," Aurelia declared, turning her piercing gaze up to the balcony where Minister Alarion was furiously trying to retreat. "You are our allies, and God help anyone who stands against us." The plaza had barely registered the Empress's monumental declaration before the reality of the High Minister's desperation shattered the fragile peace. Lord Alarion, realizing his silent coup had failed and his life was forfeit, made his final, fatal gambit. He leaned over the balcony railing and screamed a command in the ancient high tongue of Aegis Prime. A kill order. Instantly, a third of the remaining Praetorian guards stationed around the perimeter raised their plasmacasters. The rot of treason had spread far deeper than a few hired mercenaries. These were elite imperial soldiers, traditionalists who believed Aurelia's progressive reign and sudden fondness for humanity were a stain on their 10,000-year legacy. Commander Titus froze, his biometric sensors screaming as multiple targeting lasers painted his armor and the Empress's royal dais. His own men, brothers he had trained, were turning their weapons against the sovereign. For a fraction of a second, the mighty alien commander experienced something entirely alien to his engineered psychology. Utter, paralyzing despair. "Titus, choke point at the dais stairs. Now!" The voice cut through the commander's shock like a physical blow. Captain Elias Croft, bleeding heavily from his shattered shoulder, was not frozen. While the aliens processed the emotional weight of betrayal, the human was already calculating the geometry of survival. Croft dropped his heavy 4 Malawian Quatches pulse rifle. It was useless with only one functioning arm. He drew his secondary weapon with his right hand. It was a heavy-caliber kinetic sidearm. Its brutal, blocky design was a direct mechanical descendant of the ancient Earth firearms created by John Moses Browning, a real private citizen and engineer whose philosophy was simple: reliability and stopping power above all aesthetic concerns. "Move, Commander!" Croft roared, physically shoving the towering alien forward. Titus snapped out of his trance. He ignited his plasma blade and charged the steps, his massive energy shield flaring to life just in time to absorb a blistering volley of traitorous plasma fire. "Funnel them," Croft commanded, taking cover behind the shattered remnants of the Platinum Throne, shielding the Empress with his body. "They have the numbers, but we have the high ground. Do not let them flank." The traitors charged, expecting the loyalists to surrender in the face of overwhelming odds. They did not anticipate the human doctrine of the last stand. Croft leaned out from behind the ruined throne, his sidearm barking with deafening concussive force. Crack, crack, crack. Every shot found a weak point in the traditionalist armor. A neck joint, a visor seal, a thermal vent. Croft was firing with a terrifying rhythmic precision. He wasn't aiming to wound. He was aiming to permanently remove threats from the board. It was a stark contrast to the ceremonial dueling techniques the Praetorians favored. This was trench warfare, ugly and ruthlessly efficient. Titus, inspired by the human's ferocious tenacity, became a whirlwind of violent destruction at the top of the stairs. Whenever a traitor slipped past the commander's sweeping blade, Croft's sidearm would roar, dropping the enemy before they could draw a bead on the Empress. On the balcony, High Minister Olarian realized his brute force assault was stalling. The loyalists were rallying, emboldened by the sight of the Empress standing tall behind her bleeding human shield. Olarian turned and sprinted toward a sleek, waiting gravskiff, intending to flee the citadel and launch a full-scale civil war from the outer colonies. Croft saw the High Minister moving out of the corner of his eye. His sidearm was out of ammunition, the slide locked back. He glanced at his dropped 4 Malawian Quatches pulse rifle lying a few feet away. His left arm hung uselessly, agony burning through his nerves with every heartbeat. A shield does not fold, Croft reminded himself. Gritting his teeth, Croft lunged out of cover. He grabbed the heavy pulse rifle by the pistol grip with his right hand, bracing the long barrel against the shattered pauldron of his left shoulder. The pain was blinding, a white-hot spike driving directly into his brain. But he forced his eye to the optic sight. The gravskiff's engines hummed, lifting off the balcony pad. Croft exhaled, held his breath, and pulled the trigger. The 3-round burst of depleted uranium tore across the open air of the plaza. The rounds did not target Olarian. They slammed directly into the gravskiff's volatile propulsion manifold. The resulting explosion shattered the windows of the diplomatic wing. The skiff spun violently out of control, crashing hard into the marble pillars of the balcony. Olarian was thrown from the wreckage, tumbling down the grand staircase and landing in a broken, humiliated heap at the base of the royal dais. Seeing their leader fall, the remaining traitors lost their nerve and dropped their weapons. Silence slowly reclaimed the grand citadel, save for the crackle of burning plasma and the heavy, ragged breathing of the survivors. Commander Titus deactivated his blade, his armor scorched and battered. He looked down at Olarian, then turned and looked up at Captain Croft. Croft finally let the heavy rifle slip from his grasp, his knees buckling. Before he could hit the floor, Commander Titus was there, catching the human with one massive arm and holding him upright. It was a gesture of profound respect. Empress Aurelia stepped forward, her silver eyes sweeping over the carnage, coming to rest on the human who had saved her life twice in the span of 10 minutes. "Lord Chancellor Pierce," the Empress called out. From beneath a turned-over banquet table, the terrified human diplomat slowly crawled out, trembling violently. "Yes, Your Imperial Majesty? Burn the Solar Aurelia Accords," she commanded, her voice ringing with absolute, undeniable authority. "Draft a new treaty, the Aegis Earth Alliance. From this day forward, humanity will not pay tithes. You will sit at my right hand, not as vassals but as equals. Your soldiers will train mine in the brutal arts of survival. And Captain Croft." She walked down the steps, standing before the wounded human and the towering alien commander holding him up. "Will be the first general of the unified fleets." Croft offered a weak, pain-laced smile. "I'll have to check with my superiors on Earth, Majesty, but I think they'll approve the promotion." Titus let out a low, rumbling laugh, a sound rarely heard in the halls of Aegis Prime. "You will stand at the front, General Croft, and I will stand with you." Humanity had not just survived the stars. By refusing to kneel, they had conquered them. What a phenomenal end to an explosive saga. Captain Croft proved that humanity's greatest weapon isn't our technology, but our unbreakable spirit and tactical brilliance. If this HFY masterpiece got your adrenaline pumping, smash that like button, share this with your friends, and subscribe to the channel for more incredible sci-fi audio dramas. What historical Earth tactics would you use against an alien empire? Drop your battle plans in the comments below. Stay strong, stay defiant, and we'll see you in the next video.